In 71 CE, the general and governor of Roman Britain, Quintus Petilius Cerealis, was campaigning against the Brigantes in northern England. On flat ground, at the confluence of the Ouse and Foss rivers, in what is now Yorkshire, and a place which may have sat roughly on the border between the Brigantes and the Parisi tribes, the 9th Legion constructed a fortress. The name of the fortification was Eboracum, and the earliest mention of Eboracum comes from a wooden stylus tablet from Vindolanda, dated to 95 to 104 CE. Avicus, a permanent civilian settlement, grew up opposite the fortress on the southwest bank of the River Ouse. The last attested activity of the 9th Legion in Britain was during the rebuilding in stone of the legionary fortress, but at some time after 109 CE, the garrison of the 9th had vacated York, and there is no firm documented trace of it after 117 CE. Various ideas have been proposed as to what happened to it, including the Legion being wiped out in Britain. By 122 CE, the 9th had been replaced by the 6th Legion, who was to remain at Eboracum until the end of the Roman occupation in the 400s. Eboracum was to become a major Roman settlement, with the emperors Hadrian, Septimius Severus, and Constantius all staying there during their campaigns in Britain. From 119 to 121, prior to Hadrian's arrival in Britannia, the province suffered a major rebellion, and inscriptions tell of major troop movements, while Marcus Cornelius Fronto writes about military losses in Britannia at this time. In 122, Hadrian initiated the construction of a wall across the territory of the Brigantes, between Wall's End on the River Tyne in the east to Bowness on Solway to the west, to separate Romans from barbarians. A shrine was erected in Eboracum by the Emperor to Britannia as the divine personification of Britain, and coins were struck bearing her image. By the end of 122, Hadrian had concluded his visit to Britain. The Emperor Septimius Severus travelled to Britain in 208, strengthening Hadrian's wall, reoccupying the land back up to the Antonine Wall, and proclaimed Eboracum as the capital of the province of Britannia Inferior. In 209 he invaded Caledonia with an army of 50,000 men, but his campaign was cut short when he fell ill in late 210. He returned to Eboracum in early 211 and died there. His sons, Caracalla and Geta, were proclaimed joint emperors and returned to Rome. By 237 Eboracum had been made into a colonium, the highest legal status a Roman city could attain, one of only 4 in Britain. In 296, Eboracum became the provincial capital of Britannia Secunda. The Emperor Constantius visited Britain in 305, travelling to the far north of the island, and launched a military expedition against the Picts, claiming a victory against them the following year. Returning to Eboracum for the winter, on the 25th of July he died there. His son Constantine was declared emperor by the legions at York, and a bloody civil war ensued across the Roman Empire until 325. Changes in the layout of both the fort and colonia occurred in the late 4th century, and by 400 the town was undergoing periodic winter floods from the rivers Ouse and Foss. The once thriving colonia declined in the post-Roman era, with the population much reduced, until a reclamation of parts of the town began in the 7th century under King Edwin of Northumbria, and Eorthwyck became his chief city. Harry Gregg, in November 1972, was passing the Memorial Gardens in Lehman Road near the York railway station, and saw a man in scanty clothing lying on a gravestone, bleeding from a severe stomach wound. From the descriptions of the gravestones, I'm assuming that grave slabs nearly opposite York Station and adjacent to Lehman Road are the ones that are referred to in this account. Harry tried to talk to the man, but he is said to have replied in a strange language that Harry did not understand. He remembered taking out his handkerchief and tried to press it into the wound to stem the bleeding. Then, as he looked around for assistance and turning back to the wounded man, the man had vanished. I do not know if there was any blood on the handkerchief, as it's not recorded, but that would have been even more interesting. At an unnamed shop in the Shambles, on an old road in York, probably deriving its name from the butchers of York, which once had an open market there, a haberdasher called Arkwright was shifting boxes around in his cellar when he heard marching feet from behind the cellar wall. Then, as he watched, a troop of Roman soldiers appeared through the wall and continued marching past him. Their legs appeared to be cut off at the knee as they walked on a road below the present floor surface. 2 more almost identical incidents are said to have occurred in cellars within 100 yards of the above haberdashery shop. The Treasurer's House, now owned by the National Trust, was originally built to house the treasurers of York Minster. Between 1897 and 1930, it was owned and restored by a wealthy local industrialist, Frank Green. In it he housed his collections, a mixture of genuine 17th and 18th century antiques, reproductions, and fakes. During the time that the house belonged to Frank Green, a fancy dress ball was held where one of the guests later complained to him that a Roman soldier had rudely barred her from entering the cellar by blocking her way with his spear. Needless to say, when Mr. Green later checked, it was found that no guest had come dressed as a Roman soldier. One morning in February 1953, an apprentice plumber named Harry Martindale was installing a new central heating system and was banging a hole through the thick masonry in the ceiling of the cellar of the treasurer's house, when, just before midday, he heard the distinctive but distant sound of a horn. He thought it strange that the sound should reach him so far underground, but carried on working up his ladder. The horn continued to sound, and each time it seemed a little closer. Suddenly, a horse, described as like a cart horse with bushy fetlocks, emerged straight through the brick wall of the cellar by the side of Harry, who fell off his ladder in shock. As he crouched on the floor, he was able to see clearly that the horse was being ridden by a dishevelled-looking Roman soldier. This mounted figure was slowly followed by several other Roman foot soldiers, walking in pairs. They were small, dark men, and each one carried a large round shield on his left arm and a spear in his right hand, with a long-bladed dagger-like sword in a sheath hanging from a belt around his waist. One soldier carried a long trumpet-like instrument, which looked very battered and worn. Not one of the soldiers seemed to take any notice, or even see Harry on the floor of the cellar. Harry described the soldiers as having plumed helmets, beards, and wearing shiny tops over green tunics. Around their waists they had short red skirts, with strips of leather hanging down. They had thongs tied from their ankles up to just below their knees. For many years it was thought that Roman soldiers tied these thongs just above the ankle, but in the 4th century they tied them right up to the knees. Another factor dating these ghostly soldiers to the 4th century was their shields. It was widely thought that Roman soldiers only used one type of shield, the large and rectangular shape. However, an archaeological discovery made at Hadrian's Wall showed that auxiliary troops during the 4th century used round shields, similar in size, shape, and description to those seen by Harry. These are valid details that were not known about in 1953. The soldiers all looked downwards in a dejected manner as they continued through the cellar in the direction of the minster and the location of the Roman Principia. But the lower parts of the legs were not visible. As they reached the centre of the room, they emerged onto a recently excavated area, and the lower legs became visible. They were walking on the old Roman road buried 15 inches below the cellar surface. As the last of the Romans passed by and vanished, Harry scrambled frantically up the cellar steps to the safety of the ground floor, and there he was met by the house's curator, who exclaimed, "You've met the Roman ghosts, haven't you?" Apparently, the ghostly troupe had been seen several times in the past, and impressive descriptions of the Romans, including the green tunics and round shields, have been forthcoming from a number of witnesses. Early one morning, in 1958, Mrs. Taylor and Mrs. Harding were walking along Davygate towards Church Street when they heard a loud metal clattering. The sound was coming from Church Street, where they saw and reported about 100 men fighting with swords. Some of these men were dressed in Roman armour, while the others were said more like tramps wearing animal skins. At that moment, a delivery van sounded its horn, making both ladies run back to the curb to let it pass, and this seems to have broken the contact, for there was now no sign of the battle they had been witnessing. Early one Sunday morning in 1962, Ray Giles was walking across Lendal Bridge when he saw two Roman soldiers apparently guarding the crossing. Ray seems to have taken them at the time to have been students from the university in a rag week, or some such, and when walking past them he barely glanced at them. However, he soon became aware that they were not flesh and blood students in Roman costume, when a Yorkshire Terrier rushed past him barking furiously, while trying to snap at the figures, but went straight through the shin of one of them. At this, Ray states that they disappeared into a grey mist. There have been many instances of ghostly occurrences in the Roman baths beneath the Roman Bath pub in St Sampson's Square, most of which have been sounds. Footsteps can be heard when no one is around, and the sound of water splashing as though someone were washing themselves. There have been occasions of visitors fleeing in terror and refusing to go back down, convinced that something has brushed against them. More recently, during refurbishment of the entrance of the pub, which for obvious reasons took place at night, the decorator who was painting the walls at the bottom of the staircase refused to continue, saying something was there. The wall was only completed when another painter was found, who would only work during the day. The only real sighting that I have found so far took place while two men were spending the night in the Roman bath in order to raise money for charity, one of them being the manager of the Roman bath itself. They both saw the exact same thing, a blinding light which filled the room, in which there was the shape of a figure. The light disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, fading into the area where the bottom of the bath's cold room can be seen. This light was seen again by the manager of the Roman bath a couple of weeks later, reflected in the mirrors that used to be fixed to the wall. Again it faded as though it was being sucked into a hole, and again at the same spot. At this second sighting he is said to have packed his bags and left. Dean Court Hotel in Duncan Place, which is located in the shadow of York Minster, has the reported apparition of a Roman soldier walking around one of the hotel's rooms. 3 guests at the hotel, it is alleged, have reported seeing the ghostly figure in their bathroom mirror. And finally, amongst all the other ghosts haunting the Golden Fleece at the bottom of the Shambles, and there are a lot to choose from here, Roman soldiers are said to have been witnessed in the cellar.